all this time that I failed to notice this office's deficiencies? Well, I have.
Thousands of years ago, great civilizations rose from dust, carving their legacy into stone and time. From the silent pyramids of Egypt to the forgotten temples of Mesopotamia, every ruin tells a story of power, mystery, and human greatness. This is the journey into the ancient world. Gene Wilder brought joy to millions with his unforgettable performances in films like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Young Frankenstein. But behind his warm smile and comedic genius, his final years were spent away from the spotlight, battling illness in private. Now, at 91, his widow has finally revealed his last words, words that capture the heart of the man the world loved and the legacy he left behind. Gene Wilder, the man with the electric blue eyes and a halo of frantic golden hair, was a paradox. He was a vessel of pure comedic chaos, an actor who could transition from a gentle whisper to a hysterical shriek in the span of a single breath. It was Willy Wonka, the enigmatic chocolatier with a hint of madness and melancholy. He was Dr. Frankenstein, a man so desperate to escape his family's legacy that he insisted his name be pronounced Frankenstein. He was the Waco Kid, a gunslinger whose hands were so steady they could outdraw any foe, yet so trembling from drink they could barely lift a glass. On screen, he was a live wire, a tightly wound spring of anxiety and brilliance that could snap into pure, unadulterated hilarity at any moment. But the man himself, Jerome Sberman from Milwaukee, was something else entirely. He was a quiet soul, a writer, a painter, a devoted husband who, in his final years, retreated from the clamor of Hollywood to a life of serene seclusion in the Connecticut countryside. It was there, in the quiet embrace of the life he had built with his fourth wife, Karen Boyer, that his final chapter unfolded, a story kept private until years after his passing. And at the very end of this chapter, in a moment of profound and simple clarity, he spoke his last words. Those words, revealed by his widow, were not a punchline, not a dramatic monologue, not a flicker of the on-screen mania that had defined him for millions. They were the purest, simplest distillation of the man he had always been behind the characters. To understand their weight, their significance, we must first understand the journey that led to them. A journey of staggering highs and devastating lows, of brilliant collaboration and profound personal grief. A journey that began not with a laugh, but with a doctor's solemn warning. Jerome Sberman was born on June 11, 1933, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His father, William, was a Russian Jewish immigrant who had made a life for himself in America, manufacturing and selling novelty items. His mother, Jean, was the center of young Jerry's world. When he was just 8 years old, his mother, the family doctor, took the young boy aside and delivered a piece of advice that would become the foundational blueprint for his entire life and career. He looked at 8-year-old Jerry and said, "Don't ever get angry with your mother. You might kill her. Try to make her laugh." Imagine the weight of that responsibility on a small child. The idea that his own emotions, his own anger, could be fatal to the person he loved most. From that day forward, Jerry Sberman dedicated himself to the art of making his mother laugh. It was not a choice. It was a mission, a matter of life and death in his young mind. This planted the seed of a fundamental truth that would blossom in his acting. Comedy born from anxiety. His characters were so often men on the verge of a nervous breakdown, men whose politeness and gentle nature were constantly being tested by a world of chaos. That tension, the desperate need to keep it all together lest something terrible happen, was a feeling he learned in his childhood home. His first taste of performance came at the age of 13 when he saw his older sister, Corinne, performing on stage. He was captivated. He approached her teacher and asked if he could become his student. The teacher agreed, but only on the condition that Jerry, if he was still interested at age 16, would give him a call. Jerry dutifully waited, and on his 16th birthday, he made the call. He began studying acting formally. His passion took him to the University of Iowa, where he enrolled in the Communication and Theater Arts Department. He was a dedicated student, so much so that he was accepted into a program at the prestigious Old Vic Theatre School in Bristol, England. It was there that he not only honed his craft, but also became an accomplished fencer. For a time, He was even the first freshman to win the all-school fencing championship. This skill would later surface in his films, most notably in the comedic sword fight in The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. After graduating from the University of Iowa in 1955, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. He was assigned to the Medical Corps and was stationed at Valley Forge Army Hospital in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where he worked as a paramedic in the psychiatry and neurology ward. It was another formative experience, exposing him to the raw, unfiltered spectrum of human emotion and mental fragility, themes that would echo throughout his work. Family doctor took the young boy aside and delivered a piece of advice that would become the foundational blueprint for his entire life and career. He looked at 8-year-old Jerry and said, "Don't ever get angry with your mother. You might kill her. Try to make her laugh." Imagine the weight of that responsibility on a small child. The idea that his own emotions, his own anger, could be fatal to the person he loved most. From that day forward, Jerry Sberman dedicated himself to the art of making his mother laugh. It was a mission, a matter of life and death in his young mind. This planted the seed of a fundamental truth that would blossom in his acting, comedy born from anxiety. His characters were so often men on the verge of a nervous breakdown, men whose politeness and gentle nature were constantly being tested by a world of chaos. That tension, the desperate need to keep it all together lest something terrible happen, was a feeling he learned in his childhood home. His first taste of performance came at the age of 13, when he saw his older sister Corinne performing on stage. He was captivated. He approached her teacher and asked if he could become his student. The teacher agreed, but only on the condition that Jerry, if he was still interested at age 16, would give him a call. Jerry dutifully waited, and on his 16th birthday he made the call. He began studying acting formally. His passion took him to the University of Iowa, where he enrolled in the Communication and Theater Arts department. He was a dedicated student, so much so that he was accepted into a program at the prestigious Old Vic Theatre School in Bristol, England. It was there that he not only honed his craft, but also became an accomplished fencer. For a time, he was even the first freshman to win the all-school fencing championship. This skill would later surface in his films, most notably in the comedic sword fight in The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. After graduating from the University of Iowa in 1955, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. He was assigned to the Medical Corps and was stationed at Valley Forge Army Hospital in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where he worked as a paramedic in the psychiatry and neurology ward. It was another formative experience, exposing him to the raw, unfiltered spectrum of human emotion and mental fragility, themes that would echo throughout his work. Upon his discharge from the military, he moved to New York City to pursue acting in earnest. He enrolled at the HB Studio, where he continued to refine his skills. It was during this period that Jerome Sberman made a life-altering decision. He felt his birth name was not right for a leading man. He chose the name Gene, in honor of Eugene Gant, the main character from Thomas Wolfe's novel Look Homeward, Angel. For his surname, he chose Wilder, in honor of the playwright Thornton Wilder, author of Our Town, a play he deeply admired. And so, Jerome Sberman, the boy from Milwaukee trying to make his mother laugh, became Gene Wilder, the aspiring actor. But the path was not easy. To support himself, he took on a series of odd jobs. He drove a limousine, he taught fencing, an approach that required actors to draw upon their own memories and emotional experiences to give their characters a raw, psychological reality. For Wilder, a man whose entire comedic sensibility was already rooted in a deeply personal childhood anxiety, the method was a natural fit. It taught him to channel his own nervous energy, his own inner turmoil, into his performances. It was what allowed his characters to feel so real, so painfully human, even at their most absurd. His big break came not on screen, but on the stage. In 1961, he was cast in an off-Broadway production of Arnold Wesker's Roots. His talent was noticed, and soon he was appearing on Broadway. One of his key roles was in a 1963 production of Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children. The star of the show was the great Anne Bancroft. In a moment of backstage kismet that would alter the course of cinematic comedy, Bancroft introduced Wilder to her then-boyfriend, a fast-talking, wildly energetic comedian and writer named Mel Brooks. Brooks was, at that time, trying to get his first feature film off the ground. It was a wildly audacious and controversial comedy called The Producers, about two theatrical producers who scheme to get rich by overselling shares in a Broadway flop that is guaranteed to close on its first night. A musical extravaganza titled Springtime for Hitler. Brooks saw something in Wilder. He saw the nervous, twitchy, perpetually panicked energy that was perfect for the role of Leo Bloom, the neurotic accountant who crumbles into a full-blown hysterical breakdown at the mere thought of their scheme. Brooks told Wilder he was the man for the part. But Hollywood funding was a fickle thing. Years passed. Wilder continued to work, making his small film debut in a memorable, albeit brief, role as a hostage in the 1967 classic Bonnie and Clyde. He had almost given up on the idea of The Producers. Then, one day, the phone rang. It was Mel Brooks. He had finally secured the funding. The part of Leo Bloom was his. The Producers was a masterpiece of bad taste. A film that walked a razor's edge of offensive humor and brilliant satire. At its heart was the dynamic between Zero Mostel's bombastic, corrupt Max Bialystock and Gene Wilder's timid, anxiety-ridden Leo Bloom. Wilder's performance was a revelation. The scene where Leo Bloom, clutching his little blue security blanket, dissolves into a puddle of shrieking, sobbing hysteria is one of the great comedic meltdowns in film history. It wasn't just funny, it was psychologically real. You could feel the lifetime of suppressed fear and anxiety pouring out of him. Film was not a major box office hit initially. Its subject matter was too controversial for many in 1967, but it earned Wilder an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. And more importantly, it cemented one of the most fruitful creative partnerships in Hollywood history. The collaboration between Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks was a perfect marriage of comedic sensibilities. Brooks was the loud, chaotic, joke-a-minute maestro, while Wilder was the sensitive, reactive, emotional core. Brooks would build the frantic world, and Wilder would live in it, reacting with a level of believable terror and panic that made the absurdity all the more hilarious. Their next collaboration would have to wait a few years, as Wilder's career began to take off in a new and unexpected direction. In 1971, he was offered the lead role in a film adaptation of Roald Dahl's children's book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The film was to be called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Wilder was not the first choice. Fred Astaire was considered, as was Joel Grey, but director Mel Stewart saw something unique in Wilder's audition. Wilder, however, had one non-negotiable condition before he would accept the role. He described it in a letter to the director. He wanted to make his first entrance on screen limping, leaning heavily on a cane. The crowd would grow silent, watching this famous, mysterious, and apparently infirm chocolatier hobble towards them. Then, as he neared the factory gates, he would pretend his cane was stuck in a cobblestone. As he leaned forward to retrieve it, he would tumble forward into a perfect somersault and leap up to the roaring applause of the crowd. Why was this so important to him? He explained, because from that time on, no one will know if I'm lying or telling the truth. It was a stroke of genius, establishing the character's core essence, his unpredictability, his blend of performance and reality, in a single, elegant, physical gesture. His Willy Wonka was unlike any character that had been seen in a children's film before. He was not a jolly, grandfatherly figure. He was magical, yes, but also acerbic, sarcastic, and at times, downright menacing. He was a trickster god, testing the moral fiber of the children who had won his golden tickets. Could be gentle and enchanting, as in the iconic Pure Imagination scene, where his soft, lilting voice invites the children into a world of pure fantasy. But he could also be terrifying, as in the infamous boat ride scene. As the boat plunges into a dark tunnel, the film dissolves into a psychedelic nightmare of flashing lights and disturbing images, all while Wonka recites a creepy, manic poem, his voice rising to a fever pitch. There's no knowing where we're rowing or which way the river's flowing. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is a hurricane a-blowing? It's a moment of genuine terror that has haunted generations of children, and it's a testament to Wilder's willingness to embrace the darkness inherent in Dahl's original work. The film, much like the producers,
For millions, Gene Wilder simply was Willy Wonka. He so embodied the role that he later expressed his disdain for the 2005 Tim Burton remake starring Johnny Depp, not out of professional jealousy, but out of a sense of protectiveness over the character's integrity. He felt the new version made Wonka too much of a bizarre, isolated loner, and he disliked the direction. He called the film an insult. Following his journey into the chocolate factory, Wilder re-teamed with Mel Brooks for two back-to-back comedy classics in 1974, a year that represents the absolute zenith of their collaboration. First came Blazing Saddles, a scathing and riotously funny satire of Hollywood westerns and American racism. Wilder was not originally cast in the film. The role of the Waco Kid, a washed-up alcoholic gunslinger, was supposed to be played by Oscar winner Gig Young. But Young, who had a real-life drinking problem, suffered a physical collapse on his first day of filming. Brooks was in a bind. He immediately called his friend Gene. Wilder flew out and was in costume the next day. His chemistry with co-star Cleavon Little, who played Sheriff Bart, was immediate and palpable. Wilder's performance is a masterclass in understatement. He delivers some of the film's most iconic lines like, "Well, my name is Jim, but most people call me Jim," with a world-weary sigh that is both hilarious and tinged with genuine sadness. He brought a soulfulness to a character that could have been a one-note joke. As soon as Blazing Saddles wrapped, he and Brooks began work on a project that was Wilder's own passion project, Young Frankenstein. Wilder had conceived the initial idea. What if the grandson of the infamous Victor Frankenstein was a brilliant American brain surgeon who was deeply ashamed of his family's legacy and wanted nothing to do with it? He and Brooks co-wrote the screenplay, holding up together, bouncing ideas off one another. The result was a film that is arguably the finest movie parody ever made. It is both a loving homage to the classic Universal monster movies of the 1930s and a brilliantly funny comedy in its own right. Wilder's insistence that the film be shot in black and white, using the same period-accurate laboratory equipment from the original Frankenstein films, gave it an authentic atmosphere that elevated the comedy. His performance as Dr. Frederick Frankenstein is perhaps the quintessential Gene Wilder role. He is a man of science, a man of dignity, who is slowly, inexorably pulled into the madness of his ancestors. His journey from the pompous lecturer insisting his name is Frankenstein to the wild-eyed maniac screaming, "It's alive! It's alive!" is a comedic tour de force. The film contains countless classic moments: the Puttin' on the Ritz song and dance number with the monster, the Abby Normal brain mix-up, and the hilarious charades scene with the blind hermit, played by Gene Hackman in an uncredited cameo. Young Frankenstein was a critical and commercial triumph, earning Wilder and Brooks an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. It represented the perfect synthesis of their talents. While his partnership with Mel Brooks defined the first part of his career, the second part was defined by another iconic collaboration, this time with the trailblazing and brilliant comedian Richard Pryor. If the Wilder-Brooks dynamic was about a sensitive man in a crazy world, the Wilder-Pryor dynamic was about two different kinds of comedic energy, colliding like matter and antimatter, creating an explosion of pure hilarity. Wilder was the tightly wound, neurotic white everyman, while Pryor was the quick-witted, street-smart, unpredictable force of nature. Their first film together was the 1976 comedy thriller Silver Streak. The on-screen chemistry was electric. They were not close friends off-screen in the traditional sense. Their backgrounds and lifestyles were vastly different. Wilder was private and reclusive. Pryor was famously wild and self-destructive. But on set, they had a deep professional respect and an almost telepathic comedic connection. Wilder once said of working with Pryor, "He was a master. There was a part of him that was a shaman. He could be screaming with pain, and then he would make you laugh. He was the most brilliant comedic mind of the 20th century." Their collaboration produced several massive hits. Stir Crazy, released in 1980 and directed by Sidney Poitier,
was an even bigger success than Silver Streak, the story of two hapless friends from New York who are framed for a bank robbery and sent to a maximum security prison. It became one of the highest-grossing films of the year. The scene where Wilder and Pryor attempt to act tough to survive in prison, culminating in Pryor shouting, "That's right, we bad," is an all-time classic. They would re-team for two more films, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, 1989, in which Wilder played a deaf man and Pryor played a blind man who witnessed a murder, and Another You, 1991, which would be their final film together and Pryor's last leading role as his health declined due to multiple sclerosis. The magic between them was undeniable, a perfect comedic yin and yang that audiences adored. But behind the laughter, behind the box office success and the iconic roles, Gene Wilder's personal life was marked by profound love and unimaginable heartbreak. He was married 4 times. His first marriage to Mary Mercier was brief. His second to Mary Joan Schutz in 1967 lasted 7 years. Wilder adopted Schutz's daughter, Catherine, from a previous marriage. When he and Schutz divorced, his relationship with his adopted daughter became strained, and they eventually became estranged, a source of deep and lasting pain for Wilder. In 1981, while filming the comedy Hanky Panky, he met the love of his life. She was his co-star, a radiant, goofy, and incandescently talented comedian named Gilda Radner. Radner was one of the original not ready for prime-time players on Saturday Night Live, a comedic genius who had created beloved characters like Rosanna Dana and Emily Litella. Their connection was instant and deep. They were two of the funniest people on the planet, but their bond was built on a shared vulnerability and a deep understanding of the sadness that can often fuel comedy. They married in the south of France in 1984. They were, by all accounts, deliriously happy. They tried to have children, but Radner suffered 2 miscarriages. Then, in 1986, she began experiencing severe fatigue and pain. For months, doctors dismissed her symptoms, telling her it was just stress or Epstein-Barr virus. But the pain persisted. Finally, after 10 agonizing months of searching for an answer, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. The diagnosis was a devastating blow. Wilder put his career on hold to care for her. He devoted himself completely to her well-being, accompanying her to every chemotherapy session, trying to keep her spirits up, a painful echo of his childhood mission to make his mother laugh in the face of illness. They fought the disease together for 3 years. Radner chronicled her journey in her brave and funny memoir, It's Always Something. In May 1989, Gilda Radner passed away. Wilder was utterly shattered. He wrote in his own memoir, Kiss Me Like a Stranger, that when she died, I think a part of me died too. The loss of Gilda transformed him. He channeled his grief into activism. Furious at the misdiagnoses that had delayed her treatment, he became a tireless advocate for cancer awareness. He testified before a congressional committee, leading to the establishment of a national early detection program for ovarian cancer. With friends, he co-founded the Gilda Radner Ovarian Cancer Detection Program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He also helped establish Gilda's Club, a network of community support centers for cancer patients and their families, a place where people could find comfort and laughter in the face of their illness. Gilda's death cast a long shadow over him, and for a time it seemed the light and laughter had gone out of his life for good. It was in the aftermath of this profound grief that he reconnected with someone he had met years earlier. In 1989, while preparing for his role as a deaf man in See No Evil, Hear No Evil, he had hired a speech and hearing consultant to help him learn to read lips. Her name was Karen Boyer. At the time, their relationship was purely professional. Wilder was devoted to Gilda, but years after Gilda's death, their paths crossed again. A tentative friendship blossomed, built on shared walks and quiet Slowly, carefully, love began to grow again. Karen was not in the entertainment industry. She was a calm, steady presence who loved him for the man he was, not the movie star he had been. They married in 1991 in a quiet ceremony in Connecticut. With Karen, Wilder finally found a lasting peace. He gradually retreated from the world of acting. His last on-screen appearance was a guest role on the sitcom Will and Grace in 2003, a performance that earned him an Emmy Award. He explained his retirement by saying he was disgusted with the state of Hollywood. He detested the profanity and violence that had come to dominate so many scripts. He told one interviewer, "I didn't want to do the kind of junk I was seeing. I didn't want to do 3D, for instance. I didn't want to do ones where there's just bombing and loud and swearing. So much swearing. If a script came in that was really good and I thought, I could do that, I would do it, but it didn't. So instead of acting, he turned to his other passions." He and Karen settled into a quiet life in the 1734 colonial home in Stamford, Connecticut, that he had once shared with Gilda. He began to write. He penned his deeply personal memoir, Kiss Me Like a Stranger, followed by several novels, My French Whore, The Woman Who Wouldn't, and Something to Remember You By. He also took up watercolor painting, filling their home with gentle landscapes and colorful still lifes. He lived a life far removed from the Klieg lights and red carpets, a life of routine, creativity, and quiet domesticity. He would write in the mornings, paint in the afternoons, and spend his evenings with Karen. It was a period of contentment he had long sought, but another challenge was waiting in the wings. Around 2013, Wilder began to experience subtle changes. There were moments of memory lapse, flashes of uncharacteristic anger or distress. The diagnosis that followed was the one so many families dread: Alzheimer's disease. True to his intensely private nature, Wilder and his wife made the decision to keep his condition a secret from the public. There was a profoundly moving reason for this, a reason that circled all the way back to his most iconic role. As Karen Boyer would later explain, he simply couldn't bear the idea of one less smile in the world. He didn't want children who knew him as the magical, wonderful Willy Wonka to see him struggling with such a cruel disease. He didn't want their image of Wonka to be tainted by illness or sadness. He wanted the magic to remain intact. And so, for the last 3 years of his life, his world became smaller, quieter, confined to the peaceful sanctuary of his home. Karen described these final years not as a period of tragedy, but as one filled with love and surprising moments of joy. Though his memory was failing, his core personality. They watched his old movies, which he would enjoy as if seeing them for the first time, laughing at the antics of the man on the screen without always realizing it was him. Karen cared for him with unwavering devotion, ensuring his final years were filled with as much comfort and peace as possible. She said he never lost his ability to recognize her, his beloved wife. His decline was gradual, a slow fading of the brilliant mind that had brought so much laughter to the world. He retained his physical health for a long time, and they continued their routines, finding beauty in the small, simple moments. The anxiety that had fueled his comedy for so long had finally, in a way, been quieted by the disease. He lived in the present moment, a state of being many spiritual seekers strive for, albeit one brought on by a tragic illness. Then came the end of August in 2016. Gene Wilder was 83 years old. He developed an infection that his body, weakened by the Alzheimer's, could not fight. His health declined rapidly. He was at home, surrounded by his family, in the house that had been his refuge for so many years. Karen put on his favorite music, creating a playlist of the songs he loved most. One of those songs was by Ella Fitzgerald. As her voice filled the room, singing the timeless, hopeful melody of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a song that evoked the magic of old Hollywood and the promise of a better place. Something remarkable happened. Gene, who had been largely unresponsive, stirred. He opened his eyes. He looked directly at Karen, the woman who had brought him peace, and stood by him through his final silent struggle. With what must have been his last ounce of strength and clarity, he voiced the two words that had been the unspoken truth of his later life. The core of the quiet man behind the frantic characters. the ultimate distillation of his journey from a boy trying to heal his mother with laughter to a man who found his own healing in a quiet, profound love. He looked at his wife and said simply, "I love you." He closed his eyes, and a few moments later, on August 29, 2016, he passed away. Karen Boyer shared this story years later, finally letting the world in on his private battle and his peaceful, poignant end. His last words were not, "It's alive," or a witty one-liner. They were not a lament or a cry of despair. They were a declaration, "I love you." They were the final, perfect curtain line for a life that, for all its public zaniness, was ultimately a search for connection, for peace, for love. Gene Wilder was more than just a funny man. He was a man of deep feeling, of great integrity, of profound loyalty. He was a writer who understood the architecture of a story, an actor who understood the psychology of a character, and a husband who understood the sanctity of a vow. He gave the world characters who will live forever, a neurotic accountant. These characters were brilliant, hilarious, and unforgettable. But his greatest role, the one he saved for his final act, was that of a man deeply in love, whose last conscious thought was not of his fame, not of his legacy, but of the woman by his side. The boy from Milwaukee who was told to make his mother laugh had spent a lifetime mastering the art of comedy born from anxiety. But in the end, he found his truest expression not in a laugh, but in a whisper, a final, gentle message that affirmed the one force in his life that had finally calmed the storm within: love. And in that, the man who was Jerome Silberman, who became Gene Wilder, left the world with one last, beautiful, and profoundly true performance. Gene Wilder's last words weren't just a farewell. They were a reflection of his kindness, humor, and gentle spirit. His legacy lives on, not only in the films that made us laugh, but in the quiet moments that showed who he truly was when the cameras stopped rolling.